don't expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
And welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Bob Orr. In a Rose Garden statement earlier today, President Obama said the new oil spill cap is working, but he remained cautious, saying it's important that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves. Here's part of what the president said this morning.
The new cap is good news. Either we will be able to use it to stop the flow, or we will be able to use it to capture almost all of the oil until the relief well is done. But we're not going to know for certain which approach makes sense until additional data is in. I think it's important that we don't get ahead of ourselves here. You know, one of the problems with having this camera down there is that when the oil stops gushing, everybody feels like we're done, and we're not.
Okay, so it's good news so far, but the crisis is not over for the White House. To discuss this morning with us is Reuters Washington Bureau Chief Simon Denyer. He's at the desk with us. Simon, thanks for stopping by. So, reading the president's message, what did you make of it?
Well, I mean, caution is right? He doesn't want to declare victory too early on this because this is the test is still going on. This cap is a risky venture, and it could have made things worse. There could have been if the pipe was ruptured, there could have been a blowout here. So they've taken a risk, they've done it, they're feeling happy about it, but he doesn't want to go away to Maine for his vacation, say everything's great, and then find out that it's not as great. They've failed before. BP has tried before and failed, so I think he was understandably cautious today.
There was kind of a palpable sense around town, coming from the White House, that they were worried that the press might have been getting too far ahead of themselves. In fact, he even used that expression at one point.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the point. He doesn't want everyone to say victory, and then it looks bad for him if there is a problem. Don't forget, the relief well is the only proven way to close down a deep water well. This is not a proven method. So until we get the relief well in place, that really will be the end. That will be, we can say with confidence we can go away, and that is the end of that part of the story. It's not the end of the story, but it's the end of that sense of this well is out of control and the president can't do anything to stop it.
Right, which has been the nightmare scenario for Washington for the last 3 months now.
Right.
Give me some sense, if you would, what impact has this had on the president's political agenda? I mean, it seems like things have stood still in some ways while this has been problem number one. How much damage has it done?
Well, let's not forget, the economy is still going to be the biggest issue when it comes to the elections. I think that this issue isn't going to go away. It is going to be an issue. It's not clear to what extent people will actually vote against the Democrats because of this. Some people will obviously blame previous administration for failing to regulate the industry. So is this it's been a huge, huge distraction for the president, but in the meantime, we've still got financial reform through Congress, so he can point to a legislative victory. He now needs to really focus on what the American people want him to focus on, and that's the economy. So that's the key now in the months leading up to the elections. Can he convince people he's doing the right things on the economy?
Some analysts have observed that if you look at what's happened so far in the administration, they have some achievements to point to. Healthcare reform, now the financial reform package is done. But there's kind of this sense that they're not accomplishing anything. This must be frustrating.
You know, there are polls that show that a lot of Americans don't even know that this financial reform is coming, or anything about what
understand what it is.
Understand anything about it, right? I think a lot of Americans don't really understand whether the healthcare legislation is a good thing or a bad thing. There's enormously complicated pieces of legislation. So, yeah, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect. What Obama is pushing, these pieces of legislation that he thinks is vital for the long-term future of this country, and what people care about today, and what they care about today is the economy and jobs. And he's got to close that disconnect. He's got to convince people that what he did was worthwhile, and he's also got to convince people that he cares about what they care about, and that, as I said, that's the economy.
And if you look at jobs reports, I mean, there are some new jobs being created, but not at a very rapid pace. Some people have called this a jobless recovery, and that's tough for the White House to overcome.
Right, and all the latest signs are that the recovery is stuttering a little bit. We're not talking about a double dip, but we are talking about a disappointing recovery, a recovery that really people felt should be have a bit more steam by now. So yeah, I mean, the unemployment rate is going to be high in November, that's for sure, and there's going to be a lot of economic uncertainty out there around the country.
Now, the British Prime Minister is coming to town. What's the top of that agenda, and how will this whole oil spill thing play into that meeting?
Well, I mean, I think both men will want to make sure that the special relationship that we like to talk about between Britain and America is not damaged by this BP issue, and it has been, to some extent, it has been damaged by this. I think a lot of British people feel that the president wants to beat up on BP, that America as a whole wants to punish BP, and I think that sense that BP might be unfairly punished hasn't played very well among the British public.
Well, what is the reaction there? I mean, how is this viewed in Britain?
Well, I think that people understand that this is a big thing that BP needs to clean up, but they really don't want to see BP going out of business. They don't want to see BP unfairly punished by Congress. There's bills in front of the House now which could see BP not getting any more leases for offshore drilling at all, right? They really shut BP out of the market. Mm-hmm. And don't forget, BP is a big employer in this country, and it's a big corporate taxpayer. $3 billion a year it pays in corporate tax to the US Treasury. That's between 1% and 2% of the total US corporate tax income. So, I mean, President Obama doesn't want to put BP out of business either, actually. He needs BP to remain, in business and a profitable company.
It's going to be an interesting diplomatic dance. I mean, this won't be the typical meeting that we see in the past.
Right. No, it's not going to be all plain sailing here, but they're going to try and come out, with, yes, the special relationship is still on track, and here we're great friends, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure, as this aside, as men, I think they're going to want to get on, and I think they will get on. They just need to find a way through this particular incident.
All right, Simon Denyer from Reuters, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And now we turn to Flashpoints, our weekly series with CBS News national security analyst Juan Zarate. Juan, thanks for joining me at the desk again on Friday.
Great to be here, Bob.
Let's start with the big story of the week. Of course, the terrible bombings in Uganda, 76 people killed. This has now been directly blamed on al-Shabaab. What's the significance of this event, aside from the fact it's a terrible loss of human life?
Well, this is al-Shabaab and the terrorist threat that exists in Somalia, reaching beyond the borders of Somalia, hitting deep into Africa, hitting Uganda directly. These are targets that made sense for the al-Shabaab movement, a movement that is aligned with al-Qaeda, a foreign terrorist organization listed by the United States. Because Uganda is supporting the transitional federal government, supporting the government with which the al-Shabaab's at war. Uganda has the most number of troops as part of an African peacekeeping force there. In addition, they hit an Ethiopian restaurant. Ethiopia is an arch enemy of the al-Shabaab. Recall that Ethiopia attacked and invaded Somalia in 2006 and engaged in a fierce battle with the al-Shabaab movement at that point. And the target made sense because it was likely to be filled with expats, so Westerners and others, at a time during the World Cup. These extremists don't like the fact that people enjoy watching soccer, and so the target made a lot of sense. But the real significance here is the al-Shabaab really moving beyond the internal battles within Somalia and hitting outside the borders. And they've promised more. They've promised to hit the Ugandans. They've promised to hit the Burundians.
Now, this is not a group that is a household name, so to speak, here in the U.S., but we need to pay attention to it because while an American was killed there, the threat from al-Shabaab really has a greater connection to this country than people realize.
Yeah, American counterterrorism officials have been looking at the terrorist threat as it's evolved in Somalia for many years, and the concern there is that the al-Shabaab movement can act as a platform or a lily pad for al-Qaeda and its agenda and actually use its facilities, its operatives, its training to then attack the West. A huge concern has been a number of American Somalis who've been attracted to the al-Shabaab's cause, have actually traveled to Somalia, been trained by al-Shabaab, and the question for authorities has been, at what point do some of those operatives decide to come back to the United States and hit fellow citizens? Recall, Bob, that the first known instance of an American suicide bomber happened a couple of years ago with an American Somali in northern Somalia in connection with the al-Shabaab. And so authorities have been worried about this for a long time. And this event signals that the al-Shabaab not only has the capabilities, but the willingness to move beyond the fight within Somalia.
So it's safe to say al-Shabaab is going to be a flashpoint for some time to come. We've got to keep an eye on it.
Absolutely. Keep an eye on that. Yemen, the Maghreb, these are all strategic outposts and lily pads we've got to watch carefully.
All right, now there was a strange story that really didn't get very much play this week out of South Africa, and it involved apparently what could have been the beginning of a dirty bomb threat. Explain what that was about.
Well, right on the heels of the World Cup, authorities, South African elite organized crime forces called the Hawks, executed some warrants in Pretoria. What's interesting here is they've arrested members of an organized crime ring, but what they found was radiological material. Material called cesium-137. It's used in medical devices, industrial devices. So in some ways it's fairly common. But what was happening was this ring was trying to sell this material and a larger device. For what purposes we don't know, but it was certainly signaling an organized effort to sell radiological material. And again, here the concern is that kind of material can potentially be used in a dirty bomb or an explosive device that can wreak quite a bit of havoc.
We should explain a dirty bomb is simply a conventional explosive that has some of this radioactive material attached to it.
Right.
It can cause quite a bit of fear and also some injuries.
Some injuries and can contaminate an entire area depending on the size of the blast. And the intent there is to create radiological effects of the explosion. And so it's not clear what was at play here, and actually South African authorities still haven't found that larger device. What's interesting, too, is this comes just a couple months after President Obama hosted the Nuclear Terrorism Summit here in Washington, talking about this precise problem, the problem of smuggling of nuclear and radiological materials and the potential that that material gets into the hands of terrorist groups. We know Al-Qaeda has had a presence in South Africa before. We know that there are networks throughout Africa tied to Al-Qaeda, the Al-Shabaab movement. And so this is a worry. And certainly it was under the radar screen given the fact that we had the World Cup and the Uganda attacks.
So it was at least a criminal event. We don't know if it was a terror event, but nevertheless important.
Yeah, I don't think we want to over-speculate. I don't think there's any evidence at this point that there was a terrorism link. What it does suggest is the potential links between criminal activity and terrorist activity in that realm.
All right, now, Fidel Castro, who we have not heard or seen for a long time, suddenly appears this week on television.
The reemergence of Fidel Castro, it's a little bit like Weekend at Bernie's, but he apparently is back and well, and from all accounts and from the interview, which is an hour-long interview, has his mental faculties with him. The message from Castro, typically anti-American, was focused on what he anticipates to be a nuclear war or event around Iran. His argument, and he's been writing about this recently, is that we're headed toward a nuclear conflict between the United States and Iran, and that the world needs to prevent that and prepare for it.
Is that a serious message that people should pay attention to, or is this Castro saying, hey, look, I'm still around, I'm still here?
I think it's Castro posturing. I think it's Castro trying to present his face. And I think what's more interesting is the timing, because there's a lot going on within Cuba, within the regime. Some fissures perhaps emerging between hardline old communists and perhaps those who want to engage with Europe, with the United States, and want to open up the economy. This comes right at the time when Cuba has announced that they're going to release a third of their known political dissidents, so number 52, the largest number. Largest number since 1998 when John Paul II visited Cuba. And so it's non-insignificant. And so the question is, was there a purpose there for Fidel Castro to buttress perhaps what his brother Raul Castro was doing, or was there some other purpose? Recall as well, there's been some tension between the brothers. Raul Castro at one point said that all things would be on the table in negotiations with the U.S. Fidel Castro came out the day after saying he didn't really mean that. He didn't know what he was talking about. And so having Fidel Castro out at a point where Raul Castro is making deals with the Catholic Church, the European Union, and potentially the U.S., with this travel ban being negotiated in Congress, may be a signal that this is okay with Fidel.
All right, and finally today, the International Criminal Court. Again, a lot of people don't really know what this is, but there are some big events before the court.
Well, this is a busy time for the International Criminal Court. Recall that this was a court established by treaty in 1998 called the Rome Statute. What's interesting now is that the proceedings of the International Criminal Court are heating up. You have the second indictment of President Bashir of the Sudan, indicted now for genocide in Darfur. He had been indicted for war crimes and crimes against humanity. This is an additional arrest warrant. You also have the Charles Taylor trial, which is well underway in The Hague, and the prospects of Naomi Campbell being called as a witness.
The supermodel?
The supermodel.
This is about a blood diamond issue.
Yes, absolutely. Charles Taylor, who was the president of Liberia, is charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity for fomenting a lot of the conflict in the neighboring country, Sierra Leone. One of the key charges from the prosecution, one of the things they're trying to prove is that he actually used blood diamonds. He used diamonds to help fuel the conflict. He's denied this, of course, but the reason the prosecution is calling Naomi Campbell is to make the claim that she received diamonds directly from Charles Taylor, and that Charles Taylor traveled frequently with these diamonds as a way of paying people and giving gifts. In this case, diamonds are probably Naomi Campbell's worst best friend.
Yeah, at least you got her to the witness stand, or nearly. And then there's one more issue there.
Yeah, one more issue. Interestingly, in Kampala, Uganda, just recently, delegates from around the world met to talk about the ICC. And the question there is, how far should their jurisdiction reach? You have jurisdiction for genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, but they also have in their remit an undefined crime, crimes of aggression. And countries like the United States and big countries like Russia and China have been wary of giving too much jurisdiction to the International Criminal Court, especially in something amorphous like crimes of aggression. Can American military officials, for example, be charged because of our invasion of Iraq? Invasion of Afghanistan.
And could the court enforce that if
Exactly.
they decided to move?
Exactly. And so this conference was important because it actually defined the crime. It actually set very tight limits as to how it could be applied. The U.S. will not be subject to this, which is good news. And it won't go in force until 2017. And so this, in some ways, restricts the court's ability to act. But where we're seeing the court most active is in Africa, and we're seeing it now with Charles Taylor and with President Bashir.
When you lay out all these problems on a Friday, can you enjoy the weekend then after this?
I try to, Bob. I try.
All right. Well, Juan, thanks again as always.
Thank you, Bob.
And thanks to all of you for watching Washington Unplugged. Catch us every day right here on CBSNews.com. I'm Bob Orr. Have a great weekend.